Welcome to my London-based studio, a space I've been working continuously in for the past 2 years in the Royal Academy of Arts. My name is Catinca Malaimare and I'm a London-based artist and a postgraduate student at the Royal Academy of Schools. Having a studio is a necessity to actively live in the concepts of what I produce artistically. I notice a behavioral change when I'm in the studio and I look at the studio walls as if I'm haunted by this mantra that asks repeatedly, isn't technology beautiful? To which the studio always has an answer. The whole identity of my studio is always a continual process. At any time it is a room full of bodies, just not all of these bodies are human and most certainly not all mine. There's no better form than the live performance and the cinematic to represent the central appeal of technology, and that centrality should have a central delivery as well, and that is often the support structures that make up a hanging system for a TV to become a monitor in an exhibition installation, or the prosthetic looking pipe that holds up an entire rack of spotlights. It's gear that speaks to the eye, and that for me forms part of this cultural perception of technology. Having a fantasy now as a contemporary body about technology crossing over into our lives is likely a familiar story about a reality that we share with the TVs in our living rooms and the prosthetic phones in our hands. Technology design is a fast-changing industry that sets the space that translates into non-stop desire production, that entertains a fantasy, that lives in an undetermined space emotionally, and I prefer some technologies to others, and those more and more seem to belong to my generation, and I'm very forward in that relationship. Everything has to be photographed by a camera and has to be seen by the lens of a camera before it reaches a live audience. My audience is always a gathering of voyeurs, and that makes it easy to exploit images that compete aggressively to be used and abused. Was filmed below my studio in a kitchen lift that serves the RA's all kitchen corridors below the ground. This space has become for that period in time the extension of my usual studio. I choose to film in a location based on a visual response I get from it and for its visual potential. To film low sodium, for example, I temporarily relocated my studio in an old textile factory, and I developed the work for the building's main lift. An old metal and wood cage with these intricate laced mesh lock gate and golden door. The scale of that cage and the height of the Kinoflow stage lights that match my own body kind of integrity flirted really well with the conditions that I set up for my viewership. The images in the film also have this accuracy of a video game cutscene. With this use of light, I feel like it is in some way a call to antiquity, to this original fire from which we moved on to artificially and mechanically build light in a very beautiful rendition of the human body that already exists, dictated by our obsessions to use the human body as a reference maker and a reference marker in building anything remotely connected to it. A good design is being very clear what it's used for. The curve is a very prosthetic thing that has been added to design in as seamless a way as possible to reunite bodies that don't look like you but that have the same characteristics. The prints where I pose alongside two Discover Space helmet TVs from the 80s, either attracting the viewer with the challenging gaze or disregarding the viewer by completely looking away. They're images taken in the studio space during the periods where the space here turns into a functional photography studio, altering the architecture necessary to accommodate the requirements of the image that I want to produce. These self-portraits reflect back on what watches them. Images rely on an encounter, and when there are also screens in between the viewing subjects and the performing body, the work often begins with the contemplation of a barrier and an entry point into a scene that isn't entirely public. Its viewership is trespassing the private in some way, like a wicked game of manifesting through holding someone's gaze until they break down and look away. The film Eight of Clubs, I researched the rental market for a technology that is a literal take on anthropomorphic machines, an LED portrait lamp that is 3D printed, a body with 8 limbs, just like an arachnid has in its skeletal build. It behaves like a spider whose legs curl up underneath it. Performing alongside it calls into question the potential that exists in the items that I choose to adorn myself with and onto which I can project these desires I feel strongly. They appeal to my senses, and I choose to work with these artificial partners because they elicit and trigger these feelings surrounding our vastly intricate relationship to technology, things we fear, love, hate, and desire in equal measure. Exhibited in Dreams Made Flesh, a group exhibition beautifully curated by Luis Manuel Araujo's tender eye towards the effective technologies of queer desires, and shown in Bucharest in Catinca Malaimare gallery. Eight of Clubs is a single channel film that in that installation is complemented by strips of PVCs, making up transparent yellow tinted curtains with a citronella infused spider deterrent laid out in configurations that impregnate reflections of that film into the room's entry points. Technology is definitely not a neutral instrument. Once it finds its way into our habits of living, the more articulate it becomes in our own mannerisms. This makes it easier for us to see them as reflections of ourselves. I have a strong lust for technologies that assume the human referent in the real world. Enough technology that is beautiful even when it's off. When you pull the plug and it doesn't take much away because they have these amazing slender bodies that steal a look or two. When you offer someone a barrier, a limitation of either visual or physical access to your own body in the performance, they become very intelligent in finding ways to see, even if that means seeing through walls. I like how a human body is read in performance, and that these readings change vastly when props are involved. The audience is invested differently in the work and in the live experience of it when before them is an actual body. Their interest in the objects handled or those that adorn my body grows when these become less recognizable and more open to interpretation and fantasy, because that means that whatever they're watching offers a promise of a twisted mundanity. In the studio, I have a constant dialogue with my own body, and of course my interest in unpicking this relationship between subject and object and being very conscious of how reversible that relationship actually is in reference to my work was always a way of thinking that it's possible to explore this relationship within performance art much better than any other medium. You inevitably push against or incorporate anything that an audience brings to the performance arena. There have been moments when my installation started to act as if haunted, and I had to find a solution while maintaining that tension the audience was expecting of me and of the performance. I started pulling cables out of the TVs that I was using and made use of this no signal screensaver as ad hoc moving image. It really makes me think sculpturally about performance because every moment integrating in the work is an objectivization. Being a performer in my own work gives me a perspective that I can get a distance from as an artist. Specific audiences and contexts require a constant actualization of how I think about soliciting a response from my own viewer.